AI is changing faster than most procurement teams realize today. Automated spend classification, automated routing of approvals to the right person, extracting data from invoices and validating it. These are not futuristic concepts anymore. But here's where most teams go wrong. They hear about AI and the next thing they look for is what tool to buy so we can automate our process without realizing whether your purchasing process is ready for automation or not. So that's how we'll end up automating chaos rather than having an efficient procurement process. So in this video, I'm going to break down like a step-by-step process on how to do AI right in procurement, what are the steps and in the sequence in which you should implement that, and how you can get a most efficient purchasing process. And most of all, how do you stop your team wasting time on chasing email invoices and approvals and so on. So let's jump in. Step 1 is assess your current process. Here's the reality with most finance team. They have not documented their procurement process, right? Whether they might be using something like an email, Slack, and so on. And I'm talking mostly about growing companies, right? When revenue is the main focus and procurement process kind of falls secondary. And you don't want to automate your purchasing process if you don't have that documented. It's like, putting a GPS and ready to go in your car when you don't have a steering wheel, right? You're not going to go anywhere. So before you think about AI tools, think about documenting the process. So let's think about like what documentation looks like from a process standpoint. So the first thing you want to do is just kind of document the end-to-end process, how you do purchasing, how you do invoice approvals, and so on. And the second is identifying any bottlenecks that might be there, right? So bottlenecks shows up as invoice approvals not happening on time, or purchase requisition approvals take so long, or people are always getting their product later than what they actually wanted to run the operation, right? These are some of the symptoms of process not working. So identify the bottlenecks first. The other thing I see is most companies try to do everything all at once. They hear about AI contract management, AI spend analytics, AI supply risk management. They try to do all of it together. In a recent study, we saw that procurement use cases are around 6% of the overall enterprise AI use cases. And most companies stall into their AI journey few months into it because they try to do all at once and then they realize they don't have the bandwidth and land up doing nothing at all. And that directly ties into your data. AI relies on clean data to build predictions and automating most of these things. And if the data is not right, it is not going to help with your AI initiative. In a recent study by McKinsey, 20% of chief procurement officers says that their spend data is underutilized because they don't have confidence in their data. They don't have clean data at all. So we need to fix the data before we think about automation and other things that follows. So to summarize, before we automate the process, we're going to look at documenting it, right? So requisition process, AP process, receiving process, matching, exception management, all that needs to be documented. By the way, if you're watching this and you already know that your procurement process needs improvement, click on the link below to schedule a time with one of our product specialists, and we can walk you through how ProcureDesk can help you automate the process and automate and put AI in places for purchase acquisitions and AP automation and so on. All right, step 2 is get your data in order. So we talked about how AI understand patterns and do pattern matching and so on. But if your data is not correct to begin with, it is going to learn on bad data and it's going to yield bad results. So what do we mean by getting data in order? Common things that you should look for in spend patterns, like for example, supplier names are not normalized, right? You have the same name with 3 different variations and so on. So it's always helpful to normalize those vendors and so on. Having good rich item descriptions helps a lot to train the AI when it comes to spend classification or identifying, where to assign this cost or what it is and so on. So if you can clean up a lot of your historical data, that'll go a long way in training the model and so on. The second thing you want to look at is that the chart of accounts are correctly assigned. Sometimes you also see like when companies start looking at automating their AI process or procurement process for that matter, they realize that they have old chart of accounts. The chart of accounts might have changed over a period of time, and now you got the same item classified to different chart of accounts, right? One that is deleted or not present in the system anymore, one is the new. So you want to standardize all that. The second thing which you commonly see is you have the same description going to multiple chart of accounts. Very common, or suppliers for that matter. And it is common in cases where you do not have a purchase order process, where your AP team is actually relying on coding based on tribal knowledge or what they've seen fit, like and just assign it, right? And so on. So make sure that is clean. clean. Now, this foundation work might seem tedious and you might want to skip that, but trust me, you want to clean up, make sure this is in the right place before you start going forward with your AI initiatives. Now, let's talk about step 3, which is automate your procurement process first. Before you start adding AI features, you need to make sure that you have a procurement process that is automated. And that is where most people conflict, like, okay, why do we need a procurement process for AI and so on? So let me explain. When you think about AI, think about as it's an accelerator to your current process, right? So for example, if you're doing purchasing approvals today, AI can help approvals faster, maybe by providing a good summary to the approver and say, here's the context that you need to do approval, so you're not doing back and forth, or routing it to the right person, so we are avoiding the back and forth. But you do need to have a process in place that AI can actually enhance. If you don't have automation in place and you have actually a manual process, you're building something from scratch. And that might be good if you just, have a lot of resources to build these processes. But what we realize is most companies don't have these in-house resources to, use AI to kind of build the processes from scratch. So here are the 5 processes that you need to automate first. Number 1 is your purchasing requisition process, right? So how people can put in requests, where do I need to go for review and approval, who needs to review and approve it. Number 2 is a purchase order process, right? So what is the format of the purchase order, whom we're going to send the purchase order to, and so on. The third is the receiving process, and that's most companies skip because that's a very important piece that you need for three-way match to happen. So when are we going to receive the items in the system, right? So if you get a product, do we need to upload a packing slip? Who's going to do that, and so on? How are we going to check if that is missing? That process needs to be defined. The fourth process that needs automation is invoice matching. So capturing the invoices, making sure they're coming to a central place, having a process to match those invoices with the purchase order, and then finally having an exception management process so that if there is an exception, the invoice does not match the purchase order, then who needs to look at it, right? So how are we going to resolve those exceptions? And finally, the vendor management process. You want one single place to track all your vendor information, whether it is their scorecards, whether it is their performance overall on delivery, the basic AP information like W9, or even having a approval process on how are we going to manage new vendors. Can anybody request a new vendor? Are we going to have some sort of approval process? These are the decisions that you need to make and automate before you go further into AI. Now, in our experience, companies that automate these 5 purchasing processes see an improvement of 40 to 50% in cycle time and month-end close process. A recent customer that we work with, they had a month-end close process of approximately 10 days, even then that they had an ERP in which they have automated the process, right? But the process was not efficient. Just by tweaking the process and automating the matching of invoices with purchase order, the cycle time went down from 10 days to 3 days. That is the power of a process done right. All right, so now step 4, finally, let's look at some of the AI use cases that you can add today. So I want to talk about 5 major use cases where AI can add a lot more value to your existing purchasing process. So let's dive into it. The first one is AI-powered spend classification and analysis of spend patterns. So if you think about classic spend analysis, you have to pull the data, categorize this into different buckets, and identify any opportunities for cost savings. That is highly manual, takes a lot of time, and most companies honestly do it wrong because they don't have the resources to do it right. So this is where AI can help. So imagine now AI is already reading your data. It is understanding or categorizing into different buckets. So what exactly are you purchasing? And then identifying or applying different techniques on it to figure out the cost savings, right? So for example, we are buying the same item from 10 different vendors. There's an opportunity for, consolidation, or we are paying the different pricing in different months. So maybe there's an opportunity for us to reduce their price variance and have a better contract with the vendor and so on. And the other approach you can take is you can take one step further and not just do AI spend classification, but also use it to then further reach out to the vendors and ask for better bids and so on. So you can pretty much, have a sourcing agent along with spend analysis, which kind of is negotiating on your behalf. So that's first use case. The second is intelligent approval routing. Most of the times the companies kind of go wrong with approval workflows because either the approval is too bureaucratic or it is too lenient. And that's where AI can help with identifying the optimum path for approval routing. What I'm not suggesting is you skip your delegation of authority. What I'm suggesting is use AI to figure out what is the optimum approval process for your organization. So for example, let's say it can analyze last 12 months of data and realize that 90% of the time when it went to CFO for approval, your approval cycle time was was, 80% longer. So what does it mean for you, right? You can kind of look at it and say, why does it need to go to CFO? Can we eliminate that, or can we change the process a little bit, and so on? The other aspect would be, rather than defining workflows upfront, like which is typical for delegation of authority, system can figure out where else it needs to go for approval. So imagine going to IT, or for that matter, risk and so on. It automatically can figure that out. Third is invoice matching, right? So this is where AI has been traditionally used, right? Very common for OCR and so on, which is kind of, table stakes right now, right? Having the data extracted from invoices and so on. But how do you take it one step further and match the invoices automatically with the purchase orders, with the receipts, and have a confidence score? So it can basically say, all right, I matched everything, it looks good, I'm going to just automatically approve, right? So rather than having just maybe AI just pull the data, it can also identify whether the data extraction, how accurate it is. And if it is 100% accurate, it can automatically match it for you. No need for human intervention. We've seen this many times with our customers, is when we move from removing the, I would say, human in the loop, especially for, direct invoices that we are getting from the vendors, we can completely eliminate the need for reviews, because the data coming in is correct. We have verified it is 100% correct, and it can then match it with invoices, receipts, and automatically resolve the exceptions. The other aspect you can again expand on is having the AI reach out to the vendors to resolve the exception. So if there's a price exception, you can just send an email automatically through AI and say, okay, why is the price increase? Can you provide justification, and so on. So that's number 3. Number 4 is predictive demand forecasting. So especially if you are keeping inventory, whether it's for MRO supplies, especially for indirect, or you just need raw material inventory and so on, that's where AI is pretty good at demand forecasting. And especially where you have like a seasonal ups and downs and so on, or there are a lot of factors that drive the demand for how much inventory you should keep. Like for example, can it talk to your machine sensors and try to identify automatically, like when do you need spares, or traditionally what you have seen, and accordingly adjust the inventory so you're not keeping a lot or lot less, right, than what you need. And the 5th is supplier risk monitoring. And I think this is the most, I would say, important use case for AI, is because there's so much happening in the world right now. It is not possible for you to manually track all the changes that's happening, right? Whether it's geographical changes or political risk that is changing, or lack of, I would say, some minerals, materials, and whatever the case might be. There's so much going on. So use AI to kind of monitor the risk to your supply chain and then take appropriate actions. All right, step 5 is focus on adoption, not just configuration, right? So understanding where you can use AI is great, but how are you going to make sure that people are actually using it? And that is where you start thinking about not just implementing and then bringing people in to get their feedback, but having your team, or let's say human in the loop from day one, right? So here are a couple of aspects in terms of how you can think about adoption. Number 1 is, first of all, which use case you want to automate, right? So if you identify those, we talked about those 5 use cases, let's say you pick one and then you start with that. Now, in that case, okay, who's going to review that? Who's going to review the output of AI? Who's going to make sure that our team is actually able to use it? Who are my key stakeholders? So having a process to get their feedback so we can incorporate that into, our ongoing process improvement is very critical. The second thing from an adoption standpoint is you want to make sure it is done faster. In our experience, what you're seeing is anytime when an initiative goes more than 30-40 days, it loses steam and people get busy with other things and so on. So whatever AI use case that you're picking up, make sure that you are able to complete that within 30 days. For example, with ProcureDesk, when we implement our purchasing and invoicing process, we generally do it within 2 to 3 weeks, and we do it in a way that we can get the process, going and humming within like 30 to 60 days, right? So within 30 to 60 days, you're seeing significant improvements in your process in terms of reduction of cycle times for purchasing approvals, as well as matching of invoices. And we do it in a more, the same systematic way, right? Launch it, bring in some stakeholders, get the feedback, and then launch it to everybody else. So make sure you're thinking about adoption. And the final step, number 6, is optimizing and tracking the KPIs. Now, whatever process changes you're implementing, and this is, applicable for all, whether AI or not AI use cases, you need to know, like, you got to start with the end in mind, right? So work from the goal and work backwards. So if you're implementing AI, like what process or matrix you should be tracking, here are some of those things you can look for. So for example, are we reducing the cycle time for approvals, right? So are we targeting like 20 to 40% reduction is probably a good way to kind of get started. Spend visibility is another. So is the AI initiative helping us improve visibility in terms of our committed spend? How much are we able to forecast the cash flow requirements? Like, our first, maybe we were able to do it, I don't know, one week in advance. Now, can we do 30 days? Can we do 60 days? Can we do 90 days? Those are some of the things you want to look at. And then the AP error rate. So invoice matching error rates, are they going down? Are we seeing less duplicated invoices because AI is able to identify and eliminate most of them upfront, right? So those are some of the things you can look for. And the final metrics I think we should track is the month-end close cycle time. So how long does it take to do month-end, before and after? That is where you would see the most impact, or I would say the most quantifiable way to see that is, okay, before doing this, it was 10 days or 15 days. After that, it's 3 days, 4 days. That's what you should kind of look for. Now, once you start seeing process improvements in one area, that is an opportunity to go to the next, right? And implement the second use case and so on. So here's probably the loop you should think about. Prioritize the first use case, implement it, test the outcome and the impact, and then go to the next and so on. So if you're a finance leader at a growing company and looking to automate your procurement and AP process, click on the link below and talk to one of our product specialists. We'll walk you through how ProcureDesk can help you streamline your procurement AP process, set up the right process, automate it, and then how to use AI in spend classification, in invoice matching, and identifying duplicates, and so on. Most of our customers are up and running in 2 to 4 weeks, and then they see reduction in cycle times in the 30 to 60 days time window. So again, click on the link below to schedule some time. And if you want to see how to use AI in procurement and AP approval process, watch this video.